Ezekiel 33:3.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday Bible Studies. We're going to be doing Exodus chapters 25 to 27. We'll start off first with a quick overview of Exodus, going through the plagues and such. Then we'll do Exodus chapters 25 to 27. If there's any questions, and then after that, we'll assign the reading for next week. Exodus 1:8 to 11. Then a new king who did not know Joseph came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to the people, the Israelites have become too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase even more. And if a war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So the Egyptians appointed taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. As a result, they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. As we know, there was a third city. The third city was Heliopolis, also known as the Egyptian city of On. And the reason why this is important is because while it wasn't in the Masoretic text, it was in the Greek Septuagint, and there was an object that appeared at the city of On. It was the obelisk. And so the obelisk was another name for the city of On because it was called Pillar City. And here today we see pillars all over the world, like the Vatican, Washington, D.C., and London, these different three city-states. Exodus 2 and 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died and found the people of Israel groan because their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. We looked at the lineage of the Levites. The tribe of Levi is what we're focused on here because Moses was a Levite. So Moses and Aaron were both Levites. They were brothers, and their parents were Amram and Jochebed. As we mentioned before, Jochebed, for whatever reason, had the name of the Lord in her name, even though the name had not been revealed to Moses until Genesis 3 and 14. Of course, when we look back at Exodus 3 and 14, when we look back at Genesis 4 and 26, we see that people were calling themselves by the name of the Lord. However, when you take a look in the Masoretic text, it looks like it says people proclaim the name of the Lord. We've checked the King James Bible, the 1611, and we found, yes, in fact, people were making themselves into idols and calling themselves by the name of the Lord. And considering we saw in the Canaanite culture, there were other gods called Lord and other surrounding cultures, this is where a lot of confusion can come in. So Moses was to be God to Pharaoh and Aaron his prophet. Then we see the first plague. The first plague was blood in the river Nile. The second plague was an infestation of frogs. The third plague were swarms of gnats, or we've translated it as lice. The fourth plague were masses of flies or insects. The fifth plague was the death of all livestock. The sixth plague related to disease and boils. The seventh plague was storm and giant hail. The eighth plague, a plague of locusts. And the ninth plague, a plague of darkness across the land. And the 10th plague, the death of the firstborns. And you'll notice that the plagues that you see in the book of Exodus mirror some of what you see in the book of Revelation as the story concludes. And then we have the Exodus, the people left from Egypt. So now we're going to start our overview of Exodus chapters 25 to 27, starting with Exodus chapter 25. Moses received the instructions from the Lord on the mountain of God. So as we go through these next couple of chapters, this communication is happening on the mountain of God, so Mount Sinai. And as we've discussed, there's controversy in regards to where the mountain was. Some have been looking in the Sinai Peninsula, but some newer research has pointed out that it was most likely in Saudi Arabia. In Exodus 25, you see the pattern for these objects provided for the Lord. And then in Exodus 37, you see the building. So first Moses receives the pattern, and then in Exodus 37, you can see they start to actually build the things that were discussed on the mountain of God. Exodus 24 and 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay here, so I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction. Then in Exodus 24 and 18, Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So that period of time when he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights, this is when he's receiving these instructions that we're studying today. And this is really important. Exodus 25 and 40. I bolded it and made it larger because you're going to see that there's problems. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. In other words, do it exactly the way the Lord told you. And you're going to see where there was deviation as we start to go through the study. While on the mountain, Moses received instructions for the Ark of the Covenant. You'll sometimes see it called the Ark of the Testimony, the mercy seat, the table of showbread, and the lampstand. Before we get started, we're going to look at some things like old measurements. How long is a cubit? Because a cubit is a measurement that's used and referenced several times throughout these chapters. So how long is a cubit? So we can kind of get a sense in our head as to how large were some of these objects. This is a calculator. It's called Kyle's converter. You can find all kinds of different calculations, everything from luminous, mass, length. But in this case, we're looking for cubits. And you'll see that 6 cubits is equal to 9 feet. In 1 Samuel 17 and 4, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So now you know exactly how tall Goliath was. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I put together a graphic. I took Shaquille O'Neal, one of the tallest men in the world, and actually put him beside what the average height of an Israelite was. So you can actually get the comparison of how tall King David was as compared to Goliath. And here it is. In this image here, you can see David. I recorded him with an average height of 5'6". If you're wondering how I got the height of King David, there was actually teeth that were found in Israel, and they were actually able to figure out by the teeth what the average height of an Israelite was. So David was of average height. King Saul was taller, and that's why King Saul's armor didn't fit David. So that's why David went out and fought Goliath without armor on, because the armor just weighed him down. So here we can see an average height of 5'6" with the Israelites, and then Goliath was 9 feet. So yes, he's a giant, he's a Nephilim, but you see 6 cubits is 9 feet. It was 6 cubits in a span, so a little bit more than 9 feet. But if you look, Robert Wadlow was an outstanding 8'11", so not too far off. And then we have Shaquille O'Neal, a fairly tall basketball player. He's 7'1". So if you take a look at David's height went up to about his breastplate of Goliath. Now, when we take a look at the setup here, north, west, south, east, if we look at the west side was where the holiest of holies was. So this is where the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of the Testimony had resided inside of the most holy place. This area here, the tabernacle, inside you had the holiest of holies or the most holy place, and then you had the holy place where the priest was. So it was divided by a veil in the center. We're going to first focus on the showbread, and you'll see the showbread was on the north side. So you would come in from the east, and then you would come in through a first entrance, and then the showbread would be on the north side. The table of showbread, this is what it would look like. And you'll see there's 12 stacks of loaves here. The edge was 1 handbreadth. What's a handbreadth? It's a measure of 4 fingers, equal to about 4 inches. It shows up in the Bible about 3 times. Leviticus 24:8. Every Sabbath day he shall set it in order before the Lord continually. It is an everlasting covenant for the sons of Israel. So they would put the showbread out, and there were these 12 loaves that would go on this table for the showbread. Leviticus 24:5. Then you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. The 12 cakes were representative of the 12 tribes of Israel. But there's more. John 6:32-35. Jesus said to them, very truly I say to you, is it not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven? But it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us the bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So we can see the showbread. There's some interesting parallels you can draw here. Now we're going to take a look at the golden lampstand. So the golden lampstand was on the south side. It was sitting across from the showbread. So it was on the other side of the veil. The only thing on the far side of the veil, the holiest of holies, or the most holy place, was the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Testimony. The golden lampstand, and I'm going to keep referring to it as the golden lampstand because nowhere in the Bible was the lampstand ever called the menorah. Go check. Exodus 25, 31, and 32. Then you are to make a lampstand of pure hammered gold. It shall be made of one piece, including its base and shaft, its cups, and its buds and petals. 6 branches are to extend from the sides of the lampstand, 3 on one side and 3 on the other. So we have a lampstand of pure gold. The centerpiece has 3 branches coming from the left and 3 branches coming from the right. 3 plus 3 plus a center gives you 7. Exodus 25 and 37. If you need more clarity, you can see here, make 7 lamps and set them on the lampstand so that they will illuminate the area in front of it. So there's no confusion here in regards to how many lamps are on the lampstand. There are 7. There are 3 on one side, 3 on the other, plus the base that they're attached to. Let's look at Zechariah let's look at Zechariah 4, 1 and 5. And the angel who talked with me came again and woke me, like a man who was awakened out of his sleep. And he said to me, what do you see? I said, I see and behold, a lampstand all of gold, with a bowl on top of it, and 7 lamps on it, and the 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on top of it. So again, we can see in Zechariah, there's 7. And there are 2 olive trees by it. Now, let me point this out. Zechariah, he's sleeping, so he's having a vision. So he's seeing something not of this world. And there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left. And I said to the angel who talked with me, what are these, my Lord? Then the angel who talked with me answered and said to me, do you not know what these are? I said, no, my Lord. These 7 are the eyes of the Lord, which range through the whole earth. Then I said to him, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and left of the lampstand? And a second time I answered and said to him, what are these 2 branches of the olive trees, which are beside the 2 golden pipes from which the golden oil is poured out? And he said to me, do you not know what these are? I said, no, my Lord. Then he said, these are the 2 anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. And of course, you'll see them in Revelations, the 2 witnesses. Revelation 1 and 20. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and of the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So then what are the 7 churches? Revelation 1 and 10. On the Lord's day, so this is the second coming we're talking about, the return of Christ. This is a vision. John's having a vision. On the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, saying, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches. Here they are. To Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So now you know what the lampstands, they're the 7 churches. So what is this thing with the 9 candles? Some people will call this a Hanukkah menorah, but you'll see there's 7 candles, this 6-pointed star that again is not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. The only star you can find in the Bible is the star of Raphan. And this is when the Israelites were going towards astrolatry. Astrolatry is the worship of the sun and the moon and the stars. Remember what it said in Exodus 25 and 40. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern I showed you on the mountain. This is not the pattern that was shown on the mountain. We just read it. In the Wikipedia, it alludes to this as Kabbalah and the symbol of light. And again, if you look at the picture on the right, it says a Hanukkah lamp. And this is Austria-Hungary, 1867-72. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 8 candles. So 4 on the left, 4 on the right, and 1 in the center. This does not match what we just read. Here it says in this short passage, this is alluded to in the verses. Though I walk through the valley of the deepest darkness, I will fear no evil because you are with me. So we can see we're kind of paraphrasing from the Bible here. And because even if I have fallen, I will rise again. Even if I feel in the darkness, Hashem is my light. Let the light of divinity perceptions descend into the depths of darkness, into the valley of the deepest darkness, to illuminate the lowest, so that even the light and consciousness of divinity reaches them, so that he can heal and correct them to return them to him. There is a connection to the 9-candled menorah as well as the Kabbalah, but sometimes you'll see 7 and a reference to the Kabbalah. So you can see both, sometimes with 7, sometimes with 9. So you can see astrolatry, because if you understand Kabbalah, Kabbalah is actually connected to the worship of the planets, which are wandering stars. And here we can see this menorah, or this Hanukkah menorah, has 4 candles on one side, 4 on another, and then 1 in the center. So again, giving you a total of 9. So it looks like the Kabbalists can use both a 9-candled menorah or a 7-candled menorah, whereas the Bible talks about a 7-candled golden lampstand, never called a menorah. If we take a look, you can see how it breaks down. If it's the 7 candle, you can see how it goes in this order. Kether, which is crown. Chokmah or Chokmah, which represents Jupiter. And then Bina, that's Saturn. Chesed, mercy, that's Neptune. Geburah, that's Mars. Netzach, that's Venus. Hod, Mercury. And if we look down and we see Tiphereth, Tiphereth is the sun. Yesod, that's the moon. Da'ath, that's a forbidden hidden place. Pluto, Hades. And then at the very bottom, that's the earth, Malkuth. So you can map out the tree of life or the Kabbalah on the 7-candled stick here. But of course, with the 9, it makes it even easier. As you can see on the far left-hand side, we see Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, Mars, etc. So the planets, yes, they do map out to the tree of life Kabbalah. But of course, the Israelites were told in Deuteronomy multiple times, do not worship the sun, the moon, the stars, or any of the host of heaven. If these candles are being mapped out to the planets, they are being mapped out to the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now we're going to take a look at the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, also known as the Ark of the Testimony, resides in a place called the Holiest of Holies, in the most holy place. It was separated by a veil, and on the other side of the veil is where the priests would do their work. This is what the Ark of the Covenant looked like. This is what you were reading. This is what it was describing. Very similar to this image here. So you'll see that the poles are going through the gold rings. And of course, this is a box made of Akasha wood that is painted gold, where the lampstand was solid gold. And so here you can see it's meant to be carried, but it's only meant to be carried by the Levites. When they had to travel, they would pick this up. In between the 2 cherubim, what you would see is the presence of God. The presence of God would be sitting on the mercy seat. This is the mercy seat. So right on top of the mercy seat, you would see this presence of God, this illuminating light. Mistranslations, in some Bibles, I've seen the word Shekinah. The Shekinah glory is not a part of the Bible. That is a word that's been added. That word does not exist in Hebrew. The only place you can find the word Shekinah that I found is either in Talmudic writings, certain translations that came from Jerusalem, or you can definitely find it in the Quran. Overview of Exodus 25. The Lord told Moses to have the Israelites bring him an offering from every man whose heart compels him. The offering was to be gold, silver, bronze, as well as blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, acacia wood, olive oil, spices, onyx stones, and gemstones. The Lord told Moses to build a sanctuary for him so he could dwell among his people, following the pattern shown to Moses. So that's when he was on the mountain for 40 days. An ark was to be constructed of acacia wood, 2 cubits wide by 1.5 cubits wide, a cubit and a half high, overlaid with gold both inside and out. So as you can see, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't solid gold, it was acacia wood and overlaid with gold. The ark was to have 4 gold rings fastened to its feet in order to carry it, and the poles were to remain in the rings of the ark, not to be removed. Inside the ark was to be placed the testimony, the 10 commandments, which the Lord would give to Moses. On top of the ark of the covenant was to be placed a mercy seat made of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and half a cubit wide. 2 cherubim of hammered gold were to sit on the ends of the mercy seat, facing each other from one piece of gold. The wings of the cherubim overshadowed the mercy seat. The Lord said he would speak with Moses from between the 2 cherubim above the mercy seat to speak to all he had commanded Israel. The Lord told Moses to make a table that was 2 cubits long, 1.5 cubits high, made of acacia wood, overlaid with gold that had a rim around it, a handbreadth wide. And we saw a handbreadth is around 4 inches. The table was to have 4 rings fastened to the corner of the legs, close to the rim, to act as holders for the poles, used to carry the table, which was also made of acacia wood and overlaid with gold. The plates, dishes, pitchers, and bowls for drink offerings on the table were to be made from pure gold. The bread of the presence was to be placed on the table before the Lord at all times. Moses was instructed to make a lampstand of pure hammered gold, one piece from its base to its shafts, its cups, its buds, and petals. There are to be 3 branches on each side extending from its base, making a total of 7 places where lamps could be placed. On the lampstand, the center, there was to be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms with buds and petals. So in the base, if you take a look where these other branches were budding from, you would actually see that there was 4 cups where they were coming out of. The 6 branches extending from the lampstand, a bud must be under each, and all these details were to be hammered out from a single piece of pure gold. The 7 lamps sitting on top of the 6 branches and the base were to light the area in front of it, and their wick trimmers, trays, lampstand, and all the utensils were to be made of pure gold. Moses was to make everything exactly as the pattern the Lord shown him on the mountain. Exodus 26. While on the mountain, Moses received instructions for the 10 curtains of the tabernacle, the 11 curtains of the tent of goat hair, the frames and bases, the veil, and the curtain for the entrance. If you read very carefully, you might have noticed something. Sometimes it said tabernacle, sometimes it said tent. What's the difference? 4908 in the lexicon is Mishkan. Mishkan is a dwelling place or a tabernacle. So you'd find the place that was in the inner area, that was called the tabernacle. And then what would happen is they would be covered by a tent covering of goat's hair, the ohel, or a tent. So there's a difference. When we're referring to the tabernacle, we're referring to the more inner part. We're referring to the tent, we're referring to the covering on the outer part. So there's the tabernacle and the tent, the outer part. You might have seen the word tenon. A tenon is a projecting piece of wood made for insertion into a mortise in another piece. So basically, when it was talking about making the frames as a tenon, it's talking about wood that interlocks, and this is a tenon. The tabernacle. So if we take a look, we can see there was a courtyard that went around it, and then you can kind of get a feel for some of the objects that were there. So we've been looking at mainly the inside, and we can see that there was a veil on the far side of the veil in the west, because we always saw that in the west is where the Lord resided. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was, and he sat above the mercy seat, and the mercy seat had 2 cherubim that were curled towards. And on the other side of the veil is where the priests mainly did their work, and this was where the altar of incense was, the table of showbread, and the golden lampstand. We haven't got to the altar of incense yet, but we have covered the golden lampstand and the table of showbread. And the table of showbread, as we've seen, is also called the bread of presence. So these were the objects that were on the inside of the holy place. And of course, where the Ark of the Covenant was, where the veil divided it, that was the most holy place. Here's an artist's rendition of what this could have looked like. And so again, we can see some items are made out of gold. We can see at the base there, we see silver, we can see the ram skin, which is dyed red, and then we can see leather on the outside. Here's a depiction of the inside. And again, we can see the north and the south. We can see on one side, we've got the lampstand. Remember, it's the lampstand in the Bible. It's referred all the way through the Bible as the lampstand, not the menorah. And then on the other side, we can see the showbread. And then we can see the altar of incense, which we haven't got to yet. And then the veil. And then on the other side of the veil, this is where you'd see the Ark of the Covenant with the two cherubim. And then you'd see the presence of God. And again, the presence of God is not called the Shekinah. The Shekinah, like I mentioned, shows up in Talmudic writings. It also shows up in the Quran. If we take a look, here's another artist rendition, and we can see ram skin, and then here we see in this translation's badger skin. I've actually seen a couple different explanations for what the leather was on the outside, because it says leather, but sometimes I'll see, I think, whale skin or something in one occasion, but badger skin, I'm not entirely sure what the outer leather was, but it was some kind of a leather. And then beneath that, we know that was the dyed ram skin. And then we can start to see more of the tabernacle, we can start to see the goat's hair. And then beneath this, we start to get more into the tabernacle. So we had the tent, and then we had the inner part. And then in this picture on the right-hand side, we can see this is that pillar of fire, the same pillar of fire that guided them when they were making their exodus out of Egypt. A pillar of fire by night, and then by day, it was a pillar of smoke, or a pillar of cloud. Exodus 26, the Lord told Moses to construct the tabernacle with 10 curtains of linen containing blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, with cherubim worked into them. All the curtains were to be 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. And since we can see now the conversion of a cubit, for example, 6 cubits is 9 feet. It's pretty large. 5 curtains were to be joined together, and the other 5 joined together with loops of blue material on the edge of each curtain set. The curtains were to have 50 loops on each side and aligned to each other, joined with clasps to make the tabernacle a single unit. Over the top of the tabernacle was to be curtains of goat hair, and 11 curtains in total. All curtains were to be 30 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. 5 curtains were to make up one set, and the set containing 6 was to be used at the front of the tent, folded over double. Each of the 2 sets of curtains was made out of goat's hair, which were to have 50 loops and 50 bronze clasps, which were to be made to join the tent together, again into a single unit. The remains of the curtains were to hang over the back of the tabernacle, and the curtains will be a cubit longer on either side, with the excess hanging over the sides of the tabernacle to cover it. The covering of the tent was to be made from ram skins dyed red, and over the skins was a covering of fine leather. The frame was to be constructed of acacia wood for the tabernacle, with each frame being 10 cubits long and a cubit and a half wide. 2 tenons were to be connected for each frame. So the tenons were the interlocking pieces of wood. 20 frames were to be made for the south of the tabernacle with 40 silver bases, 2 per frame at each tenon. So when we looked at those artist renditions, we saw that there was this gold piece of frame, and then beneath it, you could see the silver base. The north side of the tabernacle was also having 20 frames with 40 silver bases, 2 per frame under each tenon. 6 frames were to be at the rear of the tabernacle, and the rear was the west. And the 2 frames for the 2 back corners of the tabernacle, coupled at the bottom and fitted into a single ring to serve as corners to create 8 frames and 16 silver bases, 2 under each frame. 5 crossbars of acacia were to make up the frames of one side of the tabernacle, and 5 on the other side as well, as 5 for the rear facing the west. The central crossbar in the middle of the frames was to extend from end to end and was overlaid with gold, as was the other crossbars, with gold rings to hold it. The veil was to be made of purple, blue, and scarlet, and finely spun linen with a design of cherubim worked into it. The veil was to be hung with gold hooks on the 4 posts of acacia wood, overlaid with gold standing on 4 silver bases. The veil was to be hung from clasps, and the Ark of the Testimony was to be placed behind it. The veil was to separate the holy place from the most holy place, also known as the Holy of Holies. The mercy seat was to sit on the Ark of the Testimony within the most holy place. The table of showbread was to be placed outside the veil on the north side of the tabernacle, with the lampstand on the opposite table to the south. The entrance of the tent was to be embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen. The curtain for the entrance was held up with 5 posts of acacia wood for the curtain, overlaid with hooks, with the base resting on 5 bronze bases. Now we're going to take a look at Exodus 27. While on the mountain, Moses received instructions for the bronze altar, the courtyard, and the oil used for the lamp. So that's the lampstand. So here's the tabernacle once again. Now we're looking more at the outer area. So we've dealt with the inside, where we looked at the holiest of holies, the holy place, and the objects in there. The only thing we didn't look at so far was the incense. Now we're going to take a look, though, at the outer courtyard. In the outer courtyard, this is where the animals were slaughtered. And there was an altar, there was a bronze laver, and then this is typically where most of you had the priest work that was done on the outside of the temple with the animal sacrifice, but then there was occasions when they would go into the inside of the temple and they would wave the incense, but we'll cover that in later studies. The question is, are there any remains left behind of the temple? So first, we know this started off as a tabernacle, and they'd move around the wilderness, and Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and we know that the Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years. We also know that Christ was in the wilderness, tempted after 40 days and 40 nights by the devil. So the question is, are there any remains left from the temple? Remember, we had the tabernacle, and then later in time, what did we have? Well, we had Solomon's temple. And then later, it was called Zerubbabel's temple or Herod's temple, because they did some renovations and basically extended the wall. But is there anything left for us to validate that what we saw in the Bible was in fact what the Israelites were working with, or what was in the temple? And the answer is yes, there is. As a matter of fact, we can take a look at the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus can help us see 2 things. We can see the golden lampstand, and we can also see the table of showbread. So it gives us an idea of what it looked like. Because after the Romans conquered and they destroyed the Second Temple, they marched out with all these things. So the golden lampstand, still to this day, Israel's asking the Catholic Church, where are these items? And they say they have no idea. But the golden lampstand, if you take a look, there are 3 candles on the left, there are 3 candles on the right, and in the center, you can see the last one to make 7. So where did the 9 come from? That was added. We can see that after 70 AD, when the Second Temple was collapsed, the candles were still 7. So there's no explanation for why the 9. And then we see the table of showbread, as I mentioned. So it gives you a rough idea in this rock bust of what these things looked like. Here's the Arch of Titus. We were just looking at the inside of it, but this still stands today. You can go visit and check this out. Basically, what would happen is when there would be a conquest, they'd build an arch, and then the soldiers would all come marching through the arch. So this proves that after the cross, because remember, Christ predicted that the temple would fall. And when Christ talked about himself dying and then resurrecting, they confused that he was talking about the temple, but he was talking about his own body when he said, I will destroy this temple and raise it in 3 days. And they said, that's impossible. It took us X number of years to build this. So this proves, this bust, that after the cross, the lampstand still had 7 candles. So sometime afterwards came the change. And of course, we've already seen the Kabbalists, they mark off the menorah with the planets on it. And we can also see that the 9-candled menorah has the star on it. And the star was called Raphan. And this Raphan star was associated to astrolatry, the worship of the stars, which is a form of idolatry. Exodus 27. The Lord commanded Moses to build an altar of acacia wood. The altar was a square of 5 cubits by 5 cubits and 3 cubits high, with a horn made from the wood in each corner to be one piece and then overlaid with bronze. So the horns, they weren't actually animal horns. They just actually built this piece out of bronze and built it so each corner had a horn on it. All the utensils for the altar were to be bronze, such as the pots for the ashes, the shovels, the sprinkling bowls, the forks, and the fire pans. It was to have a bronze mesh grate and held up by bronze rings on each side of the four corners. The mesh grate was beneath the altar ledge, so the ledge came halfway up the altar. You have to remember, they're putting their sacrifices in there. 2 poles of acacia were to carry the altar and be overlaid with bronze, used to carry the altar by the rings on the corners, and the altar was to be made with boards and hollow. So if you're starting to notice here, when we were dealing with the tabernacle and the tent, we're seeing more metal that was associated to silver and gold. But as we start to see these things that were on the outside in this area called the courtyard, we're seeing a lot more bronze being used. 2 poles of acacia were to carry the altar and be overlaid with bronze used to carry the altar by the rings on the corners, and the altar was to be made with boards and hollow. The courtyard was to be made from fine linen that was 100 cubits long on one side, with 20 posts and 20 bronze bases, and silver hooks and bands on the post. The north side was to be made the same. The curtains on the east side of the courtyard were to be 50 cubits wide. The curtains were to be 15 cubits long, with 3 posts and bases, as well as the opposing side. The gate of the courtyard was 20 cubits long, with a curtain made with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen having 4 posts and bases. The posts around the courtyard were to all have silver bands, silver hooks, and bronze bases. The entire courtyard was 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide, with curtains 5 cubits high on the bronze base. So if you take a look at how high these curtains were basically, getting close to around 10 feet here. So pretty much a normal ceiling in a house. All the utensils of the tabernacle were to be bronze, as well as the tent pegs. The Israelites were to use pure oil of pressed olives for the lamps, and the lamps on the lampstand were kept burning continually. In the holy place, which is outside the veil, and the Ark of the Testimony, or Ark of the Covenant, Aaron and his sons were to tend the lamps before the Lord each day from evening to morning as a permanent statute for the Israelites for generations to come. So you can see they had to keep the service going inside of the temple. They had to keep these lamps lit. Bonus content. Why is their temple backwards? And you're probably wondering, who am I referring to? The Masonic Lodge is set up completely backwards to the temple in the Bible. In the biblical temple, you face God in the west. In the Masonic temple, you must face the worshipful master who resides in the east. So it's completely backwards. If we start on the left-hand side looking at this diagram, we can see in the west is where you're coming in. And then we can see in the center of the room, it looks like there's some kind of an altar with a book on it. So the altar, it says, the altar with the volume of the sacred law. And it says, usually the Bible. It doesn't always have the Bible here. Sometimes you'll see the Quran. As a matter of fact, depending on the country that the lodge is built in and what the primary religion is, that will jurisdict what the book is that sits on this altar. And you'll see it's surrounded by 3 lights. And then in front of this altar, in the east, we see the worshipful master. Now, Christ told us, call no man your master. So one, we have a backwards temple. And secondly, we have a man called a master. If we look at the tabernacle of Moses, we can see the entrance was from the east. And then we see the holiest of holies, or the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was. That is where God resided in the west. So again, it's backwards. In the Holy Bible that was published by the Freemasons, there's a section here that talks about the East. It says, why is the East regarded more sacred than any other cardinal point? Wouldn't the correct answer be the West? I mean, this is the Holy Bible. In all ancient mysteries, the East was regarded as peculiarly sacred. As the cardinal point of the sun rising, it was considered symbolic of light, not only by sun worshippers, but by those of more enlightened religious intelligence. Hence, the East is the seat of the highest officer of a Masonic lodge, the worshipful master. Lodge halls or rooms are oblong, from east to west. Candidates travel from the west to the east in search of light. But I thought a Christian would travel towards the west to reach the most holy place. So here we can see a young Freemason receiving his Bible. And again, what's the point? Because if you're doing things backwards, I don't believe you'd be a Christian. You'd have to be something else. Perhaps it's a mystic. And if it's not a sun worshiper, well, then maybe it has something to do with the mysteries and the further enlightenment that came, like we saw, where the book was describing this very sacred place in the East. And we know that there's mysteries that also came from Babylon. As a matter of fact, in the book of Revelation, we see that there is a goddess called Mystery Babylon. Ezekiel 8:15 and 16. Son of man, he said to me, do you see this? Yet you will see even greater abominations than these. So he brought me to the inner court of the house of the Lord, and there at the entrance to the temple of the Lord, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces towards the east, and they were bowing to the east in worship of the sun. Jewish Encyclopedia. Baal and Baal worship. We know the word Baal means Lord. Perhaps people were confused as to which Lord they were to worship. Bel in Babylonia. Baal as the sun god from Phoenicia. And we know the Phoenicians were the Canaanites, so this would make a lot of sense. The question as to the origin of the worship of Baal among the Hebrews can only be settled by tracing it among the Semites in general, and especially among the Babylonians. Here the name Bel is one of the most earliest and most honored of national deities. Bel was the special god of Nippur, perhaps the oldest of Babylonian cities. Nippur was in the earliest times known as a religious center, and the prestige of Bel was so great that when the city of Babylon became supreme, his name was imposed on that of Merodach, and Merodach is in the Bible, the patron deity of the capital, who was thenceforth known as Bel Merodach, or simply Bel. And you can find this in the book of Isaiah. Bel Merodach is in the book of Isaiah. So here we can see the compass in the square, and then in the center, we see the symbol of the sun. I'll remind you that we have a game called the Invictus Games. Well, Invictus gets its name from Sol Invictus. So this would be associated to gods like Mithra. So again, are people still worshiping the sun? Are people still worshiping Baal? Has there been another Lord that's been placed in front of Christ? You tell me the temple is backwards. Here we see the gravestones, and we can see one with a compass and square on the left, one with a compass and square on the right, and then we can see the Al-Masala obelisk of Heliopolis. Remember, Heliopolis was the one place that was missing from the Masoretic texts. We found it in the Greek Septuagint, but we didn't find it in the Hebrew writings. If you had known that this was in the Hebrew writings, you might start to wonder, why is it that Pillar City, or the city of the obelisk, where they worship the sun god Ra, why is that symbol at our government buildings? Why is the symbol in front of the Catholic Church? Why is the symbol in the city of London? And why is the symbol in Washington, in the District of Columbia, where the White House is? Is the worship of the sun still practiced today? I would argue, obviously. Matthew 21 and 42. Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So who's the cornerstone? Christ is referring to himself. They rejected him. The people rejected him. The Pharisees rejected him. The Sadducees rejected him. He was the chief cornerstone. Here's a book called The Builders by Joseph Fort Newton. And so here we can see a story and study of masonry. But again, if you're facing towards the east, wouldn't that be backwards towards the biblical temple? So then who are these builders that we see in Matthew 21:42? I would suspect it would be these builders right here. Freemasons are the builders who rejected the cornerstone. As a matter of fact, we saw that the way that they interpret Christ was there wasn't one Christ for the whole world. according to mystic masonry written by J.D. Buck, there was a Christ inside of every man. In other words, you're a God, you're divine. You just have to find it inside of you. Deuteronomy 32:28-32. For their rock is not like our rock. Even our enemies concede, but their vine is from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. So, of course, when we look at the words Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom we know has to do with sodomy and sodomite. And here we can see there's two rocks. There's a rock that came from Sodom and a rock that came from Christ. Or a rock that is Christ, my apologies. And then we have Christ who is the vine, and then we have this other vine. So we have a counterfeit here. We have something similar, but it's not identical. It's a counterfeit. Chevy Silverado, like a rock. Like a rock. Not a rock, but it's like a rock. And if you notice, what's the symbol? Looks like a cross. Oh, right, the cross is a Christian symbol. No, Christ died on the cross. Christ overcame death. That symbol of the cross, it's called the Phoenician Tau. Remember, the Phoenicians were the Canaanites. So the Canaanites were the ones who came up with this painful idea of a crucifixion. And if you look at St. Andrew's cross, it's actually an X. And the Phoenician Tau is an X. It was the Romans that took this X and made it look more like a T. If we look at the Knights Templar, we can see they wore this on their shirts. And again, I'm not questioning anyone's morals. All I'm asking is this the same Christ or is this a different Christ? That's the only statement I'm making. In the sign of the atom, conquer, and then Baphomet's meteor. So there was some kind of an idea associated to a rock that fell from the sky that had to do with the Templars. For those of you who watch Amazon Prime, Stephen King's The Stand has some kind of a rock in it, and a man called the Dark Man, who looks like the devil, is the one that holds it. And so here we see this Baphomet is being associated to the Knights Templar. And this was not just an accusation coming from this particular book. This was something that the church said themselves. And this is what led to the death of Jacques de Molay. Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake. Whether or not the accusations were completely true that were made against him, I can't say for sure. But in regards to the Baphomet being the Knights Templar god, I think there's a little bit of controversy there. I think the Baphomet was actually hiding another symbol. For the profane, what they saw was this goat god. But actually, if you apply the Baphomet's name through a cipher, you'll come up with his name Sophia. And Sophia goes back to the Gnostics. And the Gnostics had this goddess Sophia, where they would sit down, they would clear their mind, they would meditate, and they would come to some kind of an enlightenment. As a matter of fact, if we take a look at a cathedral at Notre Dame that was built by the Knights Templar, you can see that this devil that sits on the artwork that they had carved themselves, it's the Baphomet. It's just depicted differently. So again, it's not that the Baphomet necessarily would be their god. Remember, the Baphomet is androgynous. It's both male and female. To the profane, you're probably just seeing the goat. But to someone who knows how to read the symbol, you're likely seeing the goddess Sophia. And if you notice on the far right-hand picture, you'll see that the Baphomet had the same symbol as the Templars did on their chest, a cross. And in the center of that cross, you would see a rose. And it looks like that was sitting directly on the solar plexus of the body. And the solar plexus, for those of you who know anything about mysticism, the chakras, this is where the heart chakra would be. The heart chakra resides near the solar plexus, and the solar plexus would be solar like the sun. If you take a look in the corner of the room, you'll notice that the plus symbol or the cross is an X. Now we're seeing the Phoenician Tau. So in the corner of the room, that's where you see the Tau. And I find it kind of interesting because in school, when you were bad, you had to sit in time out. And when you sat in time out, that was facing the corner of the room. That's where you see the symbol that Christ was crucified on, the Phoenician Tau. So there must be a difference then, obviously, between the Phoenician Tau and then this twisted cross that the Templars had. I suspect that it has to do with the ideas of light and darkness. And of course, this is the same Baphomet that you would see the sabbatical goat pentagram. So when you see the pentagram, the goat, it has the word Leviathan written in Hebrew around it. And of course, the Templars also had the pentagram showing up in various graffiti. When we take a look at the symbol of the Baphomet, the top half says Samel, and it's broken into 3 syllables. And we'll notice that when the name of God is given to Masons in the 18th degree, Bel or Baal is Jabulon, and it's broken into 3 syllables. So here I see Sa-ma-el. I suspect there must be an overlap. Samael is an angel. You won't find him necessarily in the Bible, but in some of the extra writings, like the Deuterocanonical writings, you'll find this angel in the book of Baruch. In the book of Baruch, or 3rd Baruch, you'll find that this angel was responsible for planting the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Bible. So he launched the war. That's the name that you see on the top of the Baphomet where the horns are. On the bottom, you see the name Lilith. Lilith is not broken into 3, it's broken into 2. Now think about this. The moon has 3 aspects. It has a half moon, a full moon, and a dark moon, and it waxes and it wanes. Perhaps that's the top half, because of course lunar horns might represent the moon. And then if we look at the bottom where we see the goats chinny chin chin, there's 2 sides, Lil-ith. So we have day and night, and then we have the 3 phases of the moon. I would argue that the top half of this picture would be associated to the moon, and the bottom half of this picture would be associated to the sun. The sun has a day and night, hence you have Lil and Ith, and then you have Samael, which represents the 3 phases of the moon. If you take a look at the right-hand side, you'll see la femme et l'enfant. So that means the woman and the child. So I suspect that the symbol that we see of Samael, or the goat, or the Baphomet, what really was the focus was the woman that stood in the front. So of course, if God chooses to depict himself as a male, the Father depicts himself as a male, Christ depicts himself as a male, the counterfeit would push the female. So if you've heard the term, the devil wears Prada, perhaps that's where this comes from. So when you read in the Bible, it says the devil and Satan. Well, perhaps when we talk about the devil, we talk about the bottom half, Lilith. When we talk about Satan, we talk about the top half, Samael. They're both Satan technically, because Satan's a title. It means adversary. But really, it looks like we have a sky god, Baal, Zeus, Saturn, Jupiter, or whatever name. And then the bottom, we have a goddess of many names. This is what I believe is being depicted by the 2 pillars, the pillars of the sun and moon. And of course, this maps to the Kabbalah. And we know the Kabbalah is what? The worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And in Deuteronomy, we were warned multiple times, do not involve yourself with astrolatry.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. If you hear the watchman's call, please repent and seek out Jesus Christ. There is still time. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.